Good evening, 8th graders. Let's review the Bill of Rights and the information that you need to know for your test this week and really for the rest of your life. The first is just a little background on the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights are amendments to the Constitution, but they didn't really go through the amendment process in the same way individually like that. Anti-Federalists disagreed basically with the Federalists at the Philadelphia Convention. Constitution would not be approved. They wouldn't ratify it unless a compromise was made. In the Anti-Federalists, their consistent argument was that if we have bills of rights in the states, why not a document that will protect the rights of the people for the federal government? And again, our history was that we had these rights stripped from us. If you look at the complaints in the Declaration of Independence, complaint after complaint about how the king had taken away legislative power, how the king had made the judicial power dependent on his will alone. All of these rights that had been taken away from us by the king. So we wanted the assurance that our national government would not do that to us. So the Feds and the Anti-Federalists came up with some rights. Those become the first 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights. They were ratified in 1791. The Bill of Rights basically deals with freedoms that are granted to us because we are U.S. citizens. These are the basic civil liberties that we have in our country. So the First Amendment, a lot of information packed into that First Amendment. You have religion, you have assembly, petition, press, and speech. For religion, we have a separation of church and state. That is known as the establishment of religion. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion. It goes beyond simply Congress endorsing a national religion and not using tax money to support religion. But we do have this mixture of religion when we have things like vouchers that allow students to come to Catholic schools. We have a mixture when our students ride the public school bus. So it's not as high a wall of separation maybe as Thomas Jefferson had envisioned, but there is still that separation of church and state. We have free exercise of religion, meaning you can exercise your religion. There can be limitations placed on that free exercise of religion if the exercise of your religion violates public health, public morals. There are other limitations, but those are the two big ones as far as free exercise goes. The state also can make laws that interfere with your religion if it does so only incidentally. So the case law example of that was Oregon versus Smith, right, where Smith claimed freedom of religion, but the court said that the state has the ability and the right to make laws about drugs, even though it incidentally affected this Native American religion. For assembly, basically that people can gather as long as the government approves time, place, and manner. This assembly can't pose a clear and present danger. Meetings, parades, and strikes are acceptable forms of assembly. Even if you don't like the content, but it's when it crosses the line, and that was case law from Schenck versus the United States, that if your speech at this assembly causes a clear and present danger, that it could be not allowed. Petition, we have the right to ask for a redress of grievances. We can email, we can letter, we can blog, we can comment, we can speak out against the government. Press has the right to publish whatever they want. You yourself can express yourself in print form as well, and the government's not allowed to censor that. Books, newspapers, magazines, radio, TV, internet, all forms of media fall under the press. It's not simply the newspapers. However, one limitation is that they cannot maliciously print things that they know are lies. This is referred to as libel, and it is not allowed. Speech, regarding speaking out against the government, you cannot threaten government officials. If you cross that line into threats, you're in trouble. It also covers expression, which are things that are said but not done. Other limits on for speech, it also includes internet, art, clothing, and music. Limitations on this: you cannot endanger the government or other Americans. You cannot provoke riot or other violent acts. You cannot write or speak with intent to commit criminal act or to overthrow the government by force. Part of the reason why the founders thought freedom of speech was so important was its ability to promote peaceful social change. We can use our speech to change the government, but we're not allowed to use it to overthrow the government by force. Cannot disturb the peace of others, such as loud music. Cannot lie or hurt one's reputation. If you speak it, it's called slander. If you write it, it's called libel. And of course, the case that we all know is Tinker versus Des Moines with student speech. The right to bear arms, Second Amendment, right to bear arms. Initially, it gave men the right to own and carry arms for the purpose of serving in military. Today, there is a background check. You have to have a license. You have to have a very special license if you're going to carry a concealed weapon. There's an age requirement, and you're not allowed to use your weapon to commit a crime or to instill fear in others. Today, there's some controversy about what the writer's intent was, if the intentions have been stretched a little bit. There has been some discussion about banning certain types of guns, and typically these are just the guns that are very high capacity, meant to kill a lot of people in a short period of time. But so far there's been no legislation about this. Third Amendment, peacetime, we don't have to shelter soldiers. This has not really been an issue in our country. Fourth Amendment, no unreasonable search and seizure. So, soldiers and government officials cannot search or take property without good cause. Search warrant has to be present. It has to be a valid search warrant. It has to describe the place and the items of which are to be seized. And the judge has to have probable cause in order to issue that search warrant. Probable cause, as Detective O'Dear said, is there's no checklist. He said you have it when you know it when you have it. Reasonable suspicion is a lower standard of belief that someone has done something wrong, and typically that's sufficient in schools in order to then search you and your belongings. Fifth Amendment due process, that's the very important part of Fifth Amendment. Government and law must follow established legal procedures. Due process, if you remember nothing else about it, established legal procedures. That's what due process is. So that everybody's arrested the same way. Everybody has their rights read. You are booked. You're informed of the crime. You have a right to attorney. Doesn't matter what you're accused of. You will have the same process as everyone else. Grand jury is another protection of the Fifth Amendment. Doesn't determine your guilt or innocence, just decides if there's enough evidence to go to trial. Double jeopardy is on the Fifth Amendment. That people are acquitted, cannot be tried for the same crime twice, and no self-incrimination. You do not have to testify against yourself. Amendments 4 through 8 basically deal with you if you get into the judicial process, if you commit a crime or are accused of a crime. Amendment 6, the accused gets even more rights. Speedy public trial, right to an attorney. You have a jury of your peers, and you're informed of the charges, and you have the ability to compel witnesses to testify in your behalf. In a civil case, you can get a jury trial if you choose. You can also opt out of that. The Eighth Amendment, no cruel and unusual punishment. It includes excessive bails and fines, so you cannot be charged in excessive bail for a petty crime, for example. Government officials, law enforcement cannot physically beat you. Your punishment has to fit the crime. This does not exclude the death penalty. Even though our Catholic social teaching is against the death penalty, this particular amendment does not exclude the death penalty. This is called your unenumerated rights or unwritten rights. Basically says that not all of your rights are listed. However, you still have the rights that aren't listed in the Bill of Rights. And then this is the reserved powers for the states. The 10th Amendment, if it's not explicitly given to the federal government, it automatically goes to the states. So that concludes the Bill of Rights. That's the first 10 amendments in 10 minutes. The last 5 minutes, we'll talk about the amendment process, and then also the few amendments I want you to know. So the amendment process. There are 2 ways to amend the Constitution, but the only one we're really looking at is the way that's been used every time. And it's when an amendment is proposed in Congress, ratified by the states, and then we have an amendment. And it's 2/3 of both houses and 3/4 of all states. So if you kind of make it into a rhyme, it's easier to remember. 2/3 of both houses, 3/4 of all states, an amendment makes. And just say that to yourselves. 2/3 of both houses, 3/4 of all states. 2/3 of both houses, 3/4 of all states. Make a little song in your head. It'll be easier to remember. And that's the amendment process. So we have done that 27 times. I always forget the number. 26, 27, 27. All right, 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment. Boom, boom, boom. Those 3 right in a row. The 13th Amendment, 1863, abolished slavery, passed by the northern states while the Confederate states were busy fighting the Civil War. Much easier to get those requirements of 2/3 of both houses and 3/4 of all states when half the nation that was against it is not included in that. It was a little tricky for the southern states under Reconstruction. When they came back into the Union, they had to approve this amendment in order to be let back in. 14th Amendment has a ton of stuff in it. 14th Amendment, citizenship for African Americans and due process for states. 2 most important pieces. This gentleman, the picture is Dred Scott. He was a slave that had lived in a free state along with his owner. After his owner's death, he sued for freedom. He was denied. So this was in 1857. So the purpose of the 14th Amendment is to grant citizenship to African Americans. Citizenship, you have to be born in the U.S. or naturalized in the U.S., and you are a citizen of the U.S. Naturalization is under the powers of Congress. They determine the rules for naturalization. Due process. No state may deprive anyone of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Now it is up to the states. They cannot deprive you of due process. They have to follow the same rules that the federal government does. The right to vote without regard to race, 1870. This is the 15th Amendment, and I did not change the text. But the right to vote without regard to race, 1870, disregard everything below. The 24th Amendment outlaws poll taxes or any kind of tax in order to be able to vote. The South had a lot of really tricky ways to prevent the right to vote. So this amendment, along with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, was meant to put an end to their craftiness. A very interesting issue today in this regard is voter ID laws. I've talked about this with Unit 6 a little bit, and we will look at this article and talk about it more in the coming week. 26th Amendment is the last amendment you need to know. 18-year-olds can vote, passed in 1971. This is passed in response to the Vietnam War. A very interesting amendment because it was passed right before the election of 1872. Birch Evan Bayh was a senator from Indiana. He was instrumental in the Senate in getting this passed. And the people who supported it knew, the citizens who supported it knew that they're asking these senators to vote for something that might, to include people in the electorate that might not vote for them. These young people probably were not going to vote for people that had supported the Vietnam War. But they passed it anyway. They thought it was in the best interest in bringing a lot of people into the electorate and expanding democracy. And that's it. Those are the amendments you need for Tuesday.